Welcome to the Faith to You podcast. I'm Pastor Caleb Schrader, and we're continuing our series on Incarnate love. I want to talk to you today about what it means that Jesus loved perfectly. I've talked about how he loved his Father perfectly. He loved with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength. But what I want you to understand is he didn't just love his Father. He also loved his neighbor as himself. He tells us repeatedly in the Gospel of John that he loves his sheep, that he loved his own until the end. We see in John 15:12 this is my command, love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. What's interesting is in Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, he manifests both his perfect love for his Father and his perfect love for you and me, his perfect love for his sheep. He said, this is the greatest love that anyone could ever have, to lay down his life. Now, it's so important that you understand that sacrifice. When Jesus laid down his life for his sheep, he wasn't just sacrificing his body. He was sacrificing his body because he loves. What do I mean? Let me explain from 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. It says this in 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. This is the Legacy Standard Bible. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and do not have love, I've become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. I want you to think about verse 3 there. Paul says, if I surrender my body to be burned. He's saying, if I lay down my life, a sacrifice on an altar to be burned in your place, if I do that and it's not fueled by love, it means nothing. I want you to think about that, because what that tells us is that Jesus laying down his life for us was not just the overt act that you're seeing there. It was an act that was fueled by his love for his Father and his love for us as well. Everything that Jesus did was fueled by love. Love is more than just dutiful obedience. Jesus showed he loved his Father by obeying him, but it's more than that. It's a dedicated desire. Love is manifest in its sacrifice, and it's embodied in its attributes. Let me repeat that. Love is manifest in its sacrifices, and it is embodied in its attributes. And what I mean by that is, as Jesus laid down his life, he maintained all of the perfect attributes of love. What am I talking about? Well, 1 Corinthians 13, I read to you verses 1 through 3, but it goes on in verses 4 through 8, and it describes the attributes of love, patience, kindness. All of those attributes Jesus manifests perfectly. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this exercise before, but if you read through 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, you can replace the word love with the name of Jesus, because he's the only one who's ever done it perfectly. So think about this. I'm going to read through 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8 in the CSB, but I'm going to replace the word love with Jesus. Listen as I read. Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs. Jesus finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. He bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Jesus never ends. Jesus is the only one who all of those attributes are true of. And what I want to do in the next couple of weeks is look at those attributes one at a time. So the very first one I read is Jesus is patient. Jesus is patient. As Jesus died on the cross, as Jesus lived his life, he constantly manifests perfect patience. You can see this in his interaction with his disciples. There was many times where they would get in fights and arguments and debates among themselves. And Jesus exuded perfect patience. Let me show you an example. In Luke 9, verse 46, it says this: "An argument started among them about who was the greatest of them. But Jesus, knowing their inner thoughts, took a little child and had him stand next to him. He told them, 'Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes him who sent me. For whoever is least among you, this one is great.'" So they're fighting about who's the best. Jesus is standing right there in all of his perfection, and he says you need to be like a little child. You need to seek the lowest spot. Well, lesson learned, right? No. Unfortunately, the disciples continued to argue throughout Jesus' ministry about who was the greatest. At least 2 more times we have evidence that the same argument broke out. But the final time it broke out is the most tragic, because it's right when Jesus is about to go to the cross. And he's just now told them that one of them is going to betray them. We find this betray him in Luke 22:22. He says, "For the Son of Man will go away as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed." So they began to argue among themselves which of them it would be who it was going to do it. Then a dispute also arose among them about who should be considered the greatest. Same problem. Same argument. First, they're wondering who's going to betray him. Then they start arguing about who's the best. But he said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them have themselves called benefactors. It is not to be like that among you. On the contrary, whoever is greatest among you should become like the youngest, and whoever leads like the one serving." Do you see how patient Jesus is as he interacts with his disciples? He doesn't let their arguments and their debates result in him losing his patience. He doesn't lose his cool. He doesn't get irritated with them. He calmly corrects them and explains to them what they should do. Jesus had thick skin. He was unoffendable. I want to take that home for us. If we're going to follow Jesus, that means we need to be ready to give up our life. And I think that there's some people who would say, I'm ready to die for Jesus, but they're not willing to endure an offense for Jesus. They're not willing to keep their cool for Jesus. They're not willing to have patience for Jesus. Love that sacrifices itself but is not patience is not love. So important for you to understand when you get your feelings hurt. Endure that. Think about Jesus. He's already given these directions to the disciples, but instead of getting frustrated or losing his cool, he maintains perfect calm. One of the things that helps us in maintaining that peace is focusing on the task at hand. Jesus has given us a mission. He's given us a great commission to go into all the world and make disciples. We get irritated with each other when we have too much time on our hands. That's why fights break out. That's why arguments break out. But when you're on mission, when you're trying to rescue somebody or save somebody's life, you're not going to get irritated or angry or start yelling at those who are helping you because you're too focused on what's more important. Follow Jesus' example this Christmas season. Have love that is patient, perfectly patient at all times. Keep the attributes of love as you embody the Spirit of Christ in your life. Thank you so much for listening to me today.